Welcome, everybody. A fantastic turnout today by the looks of it, but let's get started. So thank you for joining us today. My name is Rebecca Morris. I am the manager of the Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Education and Training, ADCET for short. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a woman in my mid-ish 40s. I have long brown graying hair, and today I'm wearing a white t-shirt and clear framed glasses. This webinar is being live captioned. To activate the captions, click the CC button in the toolbar. That'll either be located at the top or the bottom of your screen. We also have captions via the browser, and Kylie will now add that to the chat box. ADCET is hosted on Lutruwita, Tasmania Aboriginal land, and in the spirit of reconciliation, ADCET respectfully acknowledges the Lutruwita nations and also recognises the Aboriginal history and culture of the land. I personally am located on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging, and to the many Aboriginal people that did not make elder status. I also acknowledge all other countries and lands from participants in this meeting and acknowledge their elders and ancestors and their legacy to us and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining this webinar today. Please let us know in the chat where you're joining us from. So today's webinar, Understanding and Supporting Neurodivergent Students at University, presented by Teagan Menhenett, will introduce the concept of neurodiversity and explain key challenges neurodivergent students can experience in the university environment, as well as providing some practical adjustments that can be implemented. Before we begin, a few more housekeeping details. This webinar is being live captioned by Helen from Captify Live and will be recorded. The recording will be available on ADCET in the coming days. The presentation will run for around 45, 50 minutes or so. Then at the end, there will be 10 minutes or so for questions. Throughout the presentation, feel free to use the chat box with us and each other. And remember to choose everyone so we can all read what you have to say. Teagan, as I mentioned, will be happy to answer your questions at the end. If you have a question you would like asked, please use the Q&A box rather than the chat box. Also, we encourage you to use the reaction emojis throughout the presentation. Let Teagan know you're out there and following along. With all of that, thank you. I'll hand over to you, Teagan.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'd just like to start by acknowledging the lands that I'm joining from today, the lands of the Yorta Yorta people, the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I'd also like to acknowledge that when we're talking about supporting neurodivergent students and the challenges neurodivergent students face, often these are amplified in our First Nations community. So I would like to just acknowledge that and encourage you to keep that in mind as I go through my presentation today. Kylie's going to put my email address in the chat as well, and you're welcome to email me with any questions or feedback after the presentation today. So as a little bit of an overview, I am currently studying at Deakin University. I've just finished my undergrad Bachelor of Psychology with honours, and well, I'm almost finished. I'll be getting my results in the next couple of weeks, which is exciting, and I'm hoping to complete my Masters in Clinical Psychology in the coming years. I love dogs, and the photos on the screen show my two Border Collie dogs, Lexi and Pip. And I have professional and lived experience supporting and working with neurodivergent people. I've worked as a support worker, neurodivergent people of a variety of ages. I've worked as an allied health assistant in a children's therapy clinic and currently within a hospital environment. And I have lived experience as an autistic person myself, late diagnosed only a couple of years ago, which has really began my interest in supporting neurodivergent people and learning as much as I can about this topic, this area. I've also been involved in creating an open education resource, or OER for short, which I'll be sharing with you today as well. And that's one of the resources I've created. And at Deakin University, I've also been involved in creating a module for student mentors in supporting and understanding neurodivergent students as well, which is now available for all of our student mentors at Deakin, which is very exciting, and will soon be available for all staff at Deakin University as well. So today, this webinar I'll be covering what is neurodivergence, why it's important to learn about neurodivergence, some of the challenges that neurodivergent students can face in higher education, and how we can support them with those challenges. I'll also be, as I said, presenting the OER resource that has been published earlier this year, and there'll be an opportunity for questions, as Rebecca said, at the end. So to start with, I'd like to just give you some definitions. So when we're talking about neurodivergence, neurodivergence refers to people whose brain functioning differs from the majority. And people whose brain functions in the same way as the majority we refer to as neurotypical. Neurodiversity refers to both neurotypical and neurodivergent brains. In this group today, in our webinar, we're a neurodiverse group because we have both neurodivergent and neurotypical brains. Individuals themselves cannot be neurodiverse, and often people can make that mistake, but just wanted to highlight, if you are referring to someone whose brain functions differently, you'd be, they are neurodivergent. Neurodivergence is not a deficit, it is a natural variation in human functioning. It's not better or worse than neurotypical. We need both. We need all types of brains in our society. And I think it's just important to highlight that even though neurodivergent people might make up the minority, their brains, their experiences are not invalid. They're not a deficit. But yeah, we need all brains in our society. So when we're talking about neurodivergence, what are we talking about? And probably most commonly people think of autism and ADHD, but there are actually a lot of other, conditions that come under the neurodivergent umbrella, and those can include things like dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia, so specific learning disorders associated with reading, with writing, and with maths. Some mental health disorders as well, like obsessive compulsive disorder, bipolar, borderline personality disorder, and acquired conditions as well, such as traumatic brain injuries. So neurodivergence can be acquired, as in a traumatic brain injury, and it can also be lifelong. So conditions like autism and ADHD, they're lifelong conditions that are a person's brain functioning for their life. And neurodivergence can mean different things for different people. We might hear some people talking about their neurodivergence as a superpower, and it's something that they're really proud of. And some people just see it as the way their brain functions. It's, not necessarily something that they're considering a superpower, but it's not something that they're not, just ambivalent about it. And some people may not be as proud about their neurodivergence, or they may have grown up in a culture or society where their neurodivergence was quite stigmatized, and so they might be carrying that as well. So it's just important, I think, to acknowledge that everyone, neurodivergent people, it means different things to different people, and it's important that, I think, when we're talking about the language as well that people use to talk about their neurodivergence, it's important to use the same language that they use in conversation. So, for example, I like to refer to myself as an autistic person, but I know some other people, autistic people, might like to say they are a person with autism. So in that sense, I would be guided by the language other people use when I'm talking with them. And in the same way as we would with neurodivergence, we would talk about reflecting the same language people use, and how they talk about it in a positive or ambivalent way as well. Some people also self-identify as neurodivergent. They may not have a formal diagnosis, and that might be for reasons such as, financial or access, or they simply may not feel they need a formal diagnosis for their neurodivergence to be valid. And it's important, I think, to recognise that as well. Sometimes particularly in institutions, we can sometimes, be really focused on what is the diagnosis, and we need, I guess, proof of diagnosis to access supports. And obviously there are valid reasons for that, but at the same time, we need to recognise that that's not always accessible to everyone. So I think important to consider those factors as well. And when we're talking about neurodivergence as well, there is a saying within the autistic community, but I think it extends broadly to neurodivergence. If you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. And I think that goes for every type of neurodivergence. I think remembering to consider each neurodivergent person as a person, rather than looking at their diagnosis and assuming that they will experience the same challenges as another neurodivergent person you might know. So why does it matter? Why does learning about neurodivergence matter in higher education? Why is it important? So a number of reasons. Neurodivergent students are increasingly accessing higher education due to improved supports and understanding. In recent years, neurodivergence has obviously become a topic of interest, I think, judging by the number of people here today. But also we've developed a greater understanding and awareness in diagnosing different neurodivergent conditions, and better understanding and education of how neurodivergent can present in different genders and different cultures as well. And so for those reasons, there is becoming greater awareness and understanding. And given this, I think it's important that we learn about neurodivergent students, the challenges they face and how they can be supported. Because the chances of having a neurodivergent student in your classroom, in your university environment, is, I would say, close to 100%, if not 100%. And so that's important in promoting inclusive and accessible environments for everyone, being aware of the different ways people process and need information. So some of the challenges that neurodivergent students can experience at university, and I'd like to just preface that this is a non-exhaustive list. I have tried to group in some different categories. So regarding executive functioning, being our ability to engage in some sort of goal-directed behaviour, or to do a task, or to complete something, follow steps. Neurodivergent students can experience challenges with time management and breaking down tasks into sort of manageable chunks, organising all of the materials we might need to complete an activity or a task, remembering the different instructions in our working memory, or even starting and completing those tasks. Task inertia is a term that is used to describe particularly for some ADHD brains, but for some neurodivergent people, task inertia is a difficulty to start the task, and it can kind of explain why sometimes people leave their assignments till maybe the day before and then stay up all night to finish it. And so those challenges with executive functioning can really impact a student's ability to engage in university and to complete assignments and stay on top of their work and feel like they're managing it. And obviously falling behind in units and in assignments can then lead to and other challenges such as burnout and fatigue and overwhelm. Other challenges that might be experienced around the sensory environment at university. So universities can be pretty loud and busy places, particularly maybe in lecture halls or food courts. And these kind of overwhelming environments can build up over time and can lead to meltdowns, shutdowns, and just overwhelm in neurodivergent students. And these challenges can really impact a student's ability to engage in classes, particularly if they're sitting in a lecture hall and the person next to them is clicking their pen, and that's and then there's a light flickering overhead, and the other lighting is too bright, and the lecturer's microphone's too loud, and it all builds up And eventually that can just mean that the student might go back to their room and, you know, experience a shutdown and not be able to communicate or engage in any other activity for a few hours until they've been able to regulate themselves. And that, you know, potentially could have been avoided if they'd, you know, if the environment had been more amenable to their brain and their needs. As well as communication differences as well. Neurodivergent students have differences in the way they communicate. So tone can be a big one, tone and eye contact. Sometimes neurodivergent people can speak in more of a monotone, and that can be perceived as rude, or even people can perceive that as, you know, they're bored or they're not engaged in the conversation. Similarly with eye contact, if you know, they're not looking, if neurodivergent, if they're not looking in your eyes, that can be perceived as rude as well. I know I really don't like eye contact, but there's sort of an expectation in neurotypical society to make eye contact and to moderate our tones as well. And so sometimes those differences can be perceived as rudeness or not wanting to be involved in the conversation. Similarly with stimming. So stimming is sort of a repetitive behaviour that often neurodivergent students can use to help focus or to help calm them down. It might be using like a fidget toy, might be moving around. It can look different for different people, but sometimes as well that can be perceived as, you know, they're not listening or they're being disruptive. And often that's not the case. It's just they might need a little bit of movement, or they might need to be fiddling with something to help them focus on what they're saying or what you're saying so that they can be understanding. Small talk as well can be another one. Often in neurotypical conversation tends to start with something about the weather or about, you know, how was your weekend, how was the footy, kind of, you know, topics of that conversational nature. And for neurodivergent people, small talk is often not very interesting, and it's, you know, their conversation is more interest driven, and they might be, you know, wanting to just get straight into the task, or they might want to just talk at you about what they've just, you know, their latest special interest or their latest project that they've been working on, or what they've just been learning about for the last, you know, 3 hours last night. So that expectation to engage in small talk can be a barrier as well. And for some students who try to mask their neurodivergent traits, so they might be sort of suppressing their stimming, they might be forcing themselves to make eye contact, that can take a toll as well, and that can be a real challenge to try to fit in to that neurotypical expectation that's created. And that can lead to burnout and fatigue as well, which can ultimately lead to dropping out of university, deferring, failing assignments. Obviously, those are quite significant challenges that as a result of these kind of expectations that we sort of unconsciously have on neurodivergent students. Another challenge can be also mental illness and other co-occurring conditions. It's quite, I think, uncommon. I don't know the exact statistics, but I do know it's very uncommon for a neurodivergent student to just have one kind of condition and no co-occurring or no other diagnoses. I think for ADHD and autism, the co-occurrence is about 80%. And I think anxiety is also one of the, anxiety and depression are very common co-occurring conditions with autism and ADHD as well. I'd also just like to mention intersectionality as well. So the challenges that I've discussed also intersect with a student's cultural background, gender identity, disability, class, basically any facet of their identity. And this can create overlapping or compounding barriers in areas such as how their needs might be perceived, how they access supports, and how they can be treated in educational spaces as well. And this might be an example, might be an international student who has who's grown up in a culture where their neurodivergence was quite heavily stigmatized, or help-seeking behavior was quite heavily stigmatized for mental illness. And so then that then affects how they access supports, how they feel about accessing supports, but it can also impact our own perceptions, and biases can also then impact how we perceive the needs of students that maybe come to us asking for support as well. So I think important to reflect on the biases and perceptions that we have when we're engaging with any student, and ensure that we're meeting students where they're at and considering the intersecting aspects of their identity that might be contributing to their needs, or might be acting as a barrier in them accessing the supports that they need. So some practical, I guess, ways we can support students at university. To support with executive functioning, we can do things like scaffolding tasks and assessments, helping them break it down, breaking down the assignment prior to the due date, and for example, saying we might want to have part 1 done by this week, and we might want to have part 2 done by this other date, and allowing time in class for students to do that if that's what's going to be most helpful for them. And allowing extra processing time when giving information and when asking questions. I think an example of this is at the end for the Q&A. I'm going to turn my camera off and have a couple of minutes just to read through the questions so that I can process them before I answer them. And that will be, an accommodation that I'll be utilising. So that might be something that you can implement for your students as well in classes, or allowing, written communication, the option to, use the chat function, which I'm sure most people use anyway. In terms of the sensory environment, we can try to create calm, predictable sensory environments. We can try to use lighting that's not fluorescent. Fluorescent lighting can be really harsh for neurodivergent students. So using non-fluorescent lighting, creating quiet spaces, designated quiet spaces. So at Deakin University, we have what's called the reset room in each of our campuses in the library, which is a quiet room, quiet space where students can go to have a quiet space to regulate if they need. So spaces like that are really important, and it's really important to promote and communicate that those spaces are available to students as well. And then to support students if they do experience meltdowns and shutdowns, I think helping them find a quiet space, reducing the demands if someone's in the middle of a meltdown or a shutdown, not asking them a million questions, just letting them process, letting them be where they are, and just keeping the space as quiet and as minimally invasive as you can, allowing them to process themselves and having a quiet space for them. To support, I guess, communication differences, as I mentioned, accommodating different forms of communication, allowing students to maybe submit a written assignment instead of an oral presentation. Or one of the things I don't like is on rubrics, if they have criteria of, eye contact, and you're actually assessed on your eye contact during a presentation. I think that can be not always very accessible to students for who find eye contact, really, really challenging. So I think removing things like that from the rubric and having different options for different assessments for students. Understanding that these differences in communication is not rudeness. It's not the student trying to be difficult. It's not that they're bored. It's just how they communicate, and there's not anything wrong with that. There's nothing, that expectation that they need to be looking you in the eye when they're communicating. I think we need to kind of move past that. And some more, I guess, longer term supports can be things like access plans. We call them access plans at Deakin, but a plan that supports students with different accommodations that they can then use throughout their studies to support with burnout, but also just to support with their brain and how it functions at university. To support, I guess, the mental illness or other co-occurring conditions, obviously counselling and psychological support services is a big one, but the Hidden Disability Sunflower Lanyard Initiative is also another really great option. For those who haven't heard of it, it's a global initiative, and it invites people with a hidden disability to wear a lanyard with sunflowers on it. It's green with sunflower logos on it, or there's a wristband or a pin as well to kind of subtly indicate that you might have a hidden disability. It could be neurodivergence, it could also be a mental health condition, it could be a physical health condition that's not visible, and it indicates to people that you might need a little bit of extra time to process information or a little bit of extra support. So having those options for people to communicate, and having staff trained in supporting students with the hidden disability sunflowers, and having options like that, so that students can communicate that they may need a little bit of extra time without necessarily having to say, I need a bit of extra time or I need a bit of extra space. A really great way that students can be supported at university is peer-to-peer programs, specific for neurodivergent students. So at Deakin, we have ADHD support groups. So we have a study group where where ADHD students can come and just study and work on their assignments parallel to each other, or body doubling, which is where you're working side by side with someone else, or as a group. And that can be a really good way to help with the task inertia that I mentioned before. And it can be a really great way for neurodivergent students to connect with other peers as well. And we also have an ADHD support group, which is, I think it's run by a counsellor at Deakin, and in, just discussion around some of the challenges that ADHD students might experience at university, and kind of a group environment where they can talk together and bounce off suggestions and ideas to work together. We also have the Navigate program, which I'm a mentor in, and that pairs first year autistic students with mentors, and they meet weekly or more often as they need, and helps with that transition to university, because transitioning to university can be a really big challenge for neurodivergent students, for any student, but I think particularly for neurodivergent students and for autistic students. So having someone who they can go to as a person that they can go to for questions, concerns, and helping them to explain that university environment and what those expectations are, helping them to plan for assignments, can be really helpful as well. Actively seeking lived experience input as well to inform changes. So when, if you're looking to make changes within your university, if you're looking to make training and education opportunities, including students who are neurodivergent staff who are neurodivergent, and asking what they need, what they want to see changed, and actually listening to those suggestions as well, and making those changes based on that lived experience input. Social stories as well. Social stories, the MCG does some examples of social story if anyone's sort of unsure of what that might look like. But basically a social story is an explanation of what an event might look like, and it steps through, this is where you'll arrive, and it often has photos of the different locations people will go to throughout, like for the MCG, this is where you'll arrive, this is what will happen when you arrive, this is who'll be there, this is how many people, and it just gives a bit of an example of what that can look like. So things like that can be really helpful for neurodivergent people coming into a new environment. You might have things like that if you've got events on campus. And sensory symbols as well can be really useful. So we have sensory symbols on res at Deakin, which tells students how loud an event's going to be, how many people are expected to be there, and what they can expect from that event. So those kinds of things can be really helpful to support students so that they know what to expect and communicate with neurodivergent students. And I think, at the bottom, I'd just like to highlight making those changes structural changes rather than just superficial band-aid fixes that might encourage the student to conform to that neurotypical expectation. Making that structural change that's going to benefit all students, not just neurodivergent students. And I'd also just like to mention some of the strengths as well, because obviously we talk about the challenges neurodivergent students experience, but it's also really important to focus on the strengths that they bring to learning. So some of these strengths can include pattern recognition, hyperfocus, empathy, strong sense of justice, and special interests as well that can be a really deep special interest, and using some of these strengths. If you know a student has a special interest, you can use that to inform your subject or how you're teaching them information, or you can use that as a way to get to know them and talk to them at the start when you first meet a student or when you're regularly interacting with them. So now I'd like to introduce you to this resource, which is called Communication and Teamwork Skills to Support Neurodiversity. So Kylie is kindly going to put the link in the chat for you as well. I'd encourage you, you're welcome to have a look through it whilst I'm talking about it as well. But it's an online, freely available open education resource created by myself, Nick Milne and Shiva Krishnan, who are both lecturers in the School of Engineering at Deakin University. And this resource was created through an identified need for students in engineering who do a lot of group and team-based projects. And there was sort of an identified lack of resources to support neurodivergent students and neurotypical students in working in teams and in group projects. And obviously that's a skill that most people will use in the workforce. So we've created this resource to help develop and support students with some of those key skills. And I've been working with ADCET as well to ensure that it's accessible and inclusive for all users. So as I said, it has a focus on two key skills of teamwork and communication, enabling students to build these key professional skills for their future careers. It offers interactive activities, all of which also have text versions as well, downloadable resources to use in class or to take away, and structured group-based activities and reflections, as well as email templates for students. So some of the email templates include how to email a staff member with a question, or how to email a staff member if you've got people in your group who aren't engaging or aren't responding. And sort of templates on how students can engage in those conversations. And it can be easily integrated into teaching, into a unit, or it can be just shared with students as a useful resource. Or alternatively, it can be taken chapter by chapter. You might find one chapter is relevant to you in your role, and another chapter may not be as relevant. So it's very much a pick and choose what works for you in your role kind of resource. So it contains 3 key sections. The first section is really around what is disability, introduction to neurodiversity, so a lot of the content that I've spoken about today, and the language that we can use when talking about disability. And the final topic in the first section is how do you learn best? And it really encourages people to reflect on their learning style, their needs when they're learning, and how they work in a group and what they need from a group in order to be supported and to succeed. So the image on the screen shows is a screenshot from one of the activities called Welcome to Me, and it encourages each group member to reflect on how they work, what their strengths are, what they might find challenging in group settings, and how other team members can support them. And so I'd really encourage anyone who does any sort of group work to work through something like this activity and reflect on the strengths and what you need in a group environment, and sharing that with your team, so that if you might have differences in how you work or preferences in communication, and being kind of clear and upfront about those differences at the start can be really helpful to a cohesive team work environment. And this resource really encourages people to step through that as they go through that working in a group or in a team process. The second section is around teamwork. So contains an overview of the 4-year degree, which obviously may not be applicable to all people accessing this resource, but I would probably highlight that that's probably the only chapter that may not be relevant to everyone. The section also includes what to do in your first meeting as a team, and some step-by-step, how to introduce yourselves, how to establish methods of communication, as well as identifying some of the common challenges experienced in teamwork. So the image on the screen shows as a screenshot from one of these activities, which is a interactive activity detailing the different problems, some of the different challenges you might experience in teamwork, like scheduling problems or conflicting ideas over a project, or people not having the opportunity to speak up in a group setting. Then the little pluses on each of the challenges, you can click on those pluses, and it will explain the challenge in a little bit more detail, as well as explaining some solutions or ways to manage that challenge. That's also available as a downloadable resource as well. There's also activities that can strengthen teamwork skills and that you can work on as a group. Again, really stepping through those activities rather than just giving you the activity and expecting you to sort of fend for yourself. And then the final section in this is the project is finishing and how to kind of navigate wrapping up different projects as well. The final section in this OER is communication, and it talks about the different communication styles and how to make meetings accessible. And in this making meetings accessible chapter, there's a checklist sort of checklist of making sure that your meeting's accessible for everyone, and kind of different ways you can make your meeting accessible, including things like, does everyone have a copy of the agenda before the meeting? And, are you kind of offering breaks throughout rather than just, sitting in a meeting for 3 hours and expecting everyone to be focusing for that whole time? And finally, includes a section on self-advocacy. And what I haven't put on the slide here are the email templates at the end and the further resources as well. So that's the open education resource. I'd really encourage you to have a look further into that, and maybe even try to embed that in your learning. Pick and choose of the different chapters that might be relevant to you. So what can you do from here? I'd really encourage you to, as I said, go through the OER, further your knowledge, look at some of the links in there to other useful resources. Consider adjusting how you run your course or subject to better accommodate neurodivergent students. So using that universal design for learning approach, which ADCET have a lot of information about on their website, and seeking input from students with lived experience in neurodivergence to help inform how you create resources and to ensure that creating any resources or any supports are used with their benefit in mind. But I think most importantly, patience, understanding, and being gently curious about why a student might be always submitting an assignment late, or why they might always be asking questions or always be really confused, always making mistakes, rather than assuming kind of the worst or assuming that they don't care or that they're not interested. Sort of asking those questions and being gently curious about what else might be going on for them, or how might we be able to change the environment so that we can support them better to succeed in their studies. And ADCET also has a upcoming webinar in, I think it's the 19th of November, with E.B. Gannon, and she'll be kind of extending on some of the things I've talked about today. Her presentation's on the neurodiversity paradigm. And I'd really encourage you to, if you're interested in learning more, I would really encourage you to continue to learn more and extend your knowledge there. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. So I can see there are a few questions in the Q&A. As mentioned, I'm just going to turn my camera off for about 1 or 2 minutes while I have a bit of a read through the questions and kind of jot down some responses, and then I'll be back to answer the questions. I'm going to hand back to Rebecca, and I'll be back in about 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Teagan. What an incredible resource. We'll give Teagan a couple of minutes to go through some of those questions. So I'm not going to speak to Teagan right now, but to the audience, we have a beautiful mix of academics, of practitioners, of students, of other professionals in the room. So I thought it would be lovely, while Teagan's taking a couple of minutes, is just for us to keep the conversation going, put reflections potentially into the chat. I'm particularly interested in a strategy that has worked for you personally, or that you're implementing in your university or your educational setting. So if you could put some ideas into the chat about how to best support neurodivergent students, or what's worked for you, or those sort of experiences you've had in the past, or any reflections that you have for Teagan as well. This is a lovely opportunity to do that. So thank you, everyone.
Hello, I'm back. So I'm going to go through and answer some of the questions. I'm not sure if I can mark if they've been answered. That's just a note there, Rebecca. I don't know if you want to mark as I go. But one of the questions is burnout and or fatigue a result of the condition or because of societal structures? And I definitely think that for that one, societal structures. I think often the world is not built for neurodivergent brains, and that leads to fatigue. And I think, important to recognize that and to do what we can to change the environment so that, ideally burnout and fatigue is not even a thing. Like, people aren't experiencing that because, our society is changed, so that, we can work with our brains rather than, constantly, trying to fit in to be, to fit into this neurotypical society. One of the other questions is, have you developed any supports or guides for HDR students? And that's a really great question. At the moment, not yet, but we are looking to, in the training that we're looking to develop for staff, we will be looking to include some resources in how staff can support HDR students. Currently, that's an area that, we've identified definitely a gap in support. And obviously HDR or higher degree research runs a little bit differently to undergraduate studies. So definitely, I think, looking at how we can support students in that way. Obviously, neurodivergent students still exist in higher degree research. So definitely really important to try to address those gaps in support, and is something that we are looking to be doing. But as yet, nothing has been developed. Question: in the Navigate program, are mentors autistic also? Well, I'm a mentor in the Navigate program, and I'm autistic. I don't know the neurotypes of the other mentors, but I know we have some other neurodivergent mentors as well. And I think having that opportunity for neurodivergent students to mentor other neurodivergent students is really important. And if possible, to provide those options, definitely. Do you think it would be appropriate to provide a box of sunflower lanyards or other related items to the entrance to classrooms when students enter, or they could grab one and wear it if they want to? I think that's a really great idea. I think first, it would be really important to have information about what the sunflower lanyards are, and why we would be wearing them, because I can imagine students might just grab it thinking it might be like a free giveaway. So I think first, important to have information about what the sunflower lanyards are, and resources for students as well. But I definitely think having them in a way where they don't have to kind of make a big deal about asking for it is definitely really important. Is it better to use the OER to go in with the assumption that everyone in the group likely thinks differently rather than making adjustments? Yeah, I definitely think so. I think, acknowledging that everyone does think differently, and going, okay, how can we make this work for everyone's brain? How can we, really make this group work, rather than how can we make adjustments for this one particular person? I think that's a really good point from that question. Another question is, we are hoping to create more support for neurodivergent students at orientation days. Are there some main aspects we should consider looking at including? We already have access plan support and quiet zones, but are wondering if we are missing anything. That sounds really good with the quiet zones and access plan support. I think that's really good. I guess some things I could suggest could be like a social story or kind of information in advance of the orientation day. So students have like maps and kind of know where some of the louder areas might be, if there's going to be music or like food trucks, different things like that, kind of knowing the location of where those things might be, even on a map in advance, so students can kind of plan out, okay, I'm going to go, I'm going to stay away from this area because there's going to be really loud music playing there all day. Or, this is where the bathrooms are, or this is where the quiet zones are, so that if I get overwhelmed, I know I can go to these areas and I know, where to get there. And yeah, I think Tracy's just popped in the chat. Deakin also offers low sensory orientation tours as well, which is another option for planning orientation days. You can have specific tours that are lower sensory and kind of pointing out the quieter locations on campus in advance of busier periods like orientation periods. Is there a different lanyard for safe/allies to wear to allow students who don't want to disclose their neurotype? And yes, there is. The Sunflower Lanyard website, they also have like white lanyards with the sunflowers on it rather than the green base, and that indicates that you're supporting the sunflower. I think someone's just popped the chat in there as well, but they do. That's really good. Do I have any resources that can benefit children in high school that are not officially diagnosed but know they are divergent? I don't know off the top of my head. I know Yellow Ladybugs does some really great work for like autistic females. Amaze is also another great website. What else? I might have to think about that one, and that might be a question I come back to. I don't know, I can't remember if this was mentioned, but for some of the questions, if I don't get through them, I'll be able to post answers to these questions, and they'll go up with the recording on the ADCET website as well. So that one I might have a little bit of an investigate into some more resources that can be useful for children in high schools. So that one will come back to. And I might just do this as the last question. In environments where people are expected to make eye contact and express themselves with tone of voice, e.g. in job interviews, what advice would you give to neurodivergent students? I think that's a really tricky question because I'm preparing for some interviews for masters, and I'm going to be going in with the expectation that I'm going to have to mask, and that in order to be considered, I guess, for the role, I'm going to have to focus on my eye contact and focus on kind of masking to present in a certain way in that interview. I don't agree with that, but I think unfortunately for some situations that is what is needed. I don't think that's necessarily the best. I think it depends on what the job interview is for as well, and where, what the job environment is like as well. Like, you might want to do a bit of research before going for the job interview, and if it seems like the work environment or whatever is, inclusive, and you might be able to reach out beforehand and ask if there's particular accommodations that you need, or in the interview if you felt comfortable disclosing, or even just kind of being your authentic self. I think that's a really tricky one, and I think that's probably a personal decision. I guess my advice is to consider the environment and consider the expectations of that particular environment. Yes, in the chat someone's mentioned that you should be able to ask for accommodations without discrimination, and absolutely I agree. And it is exhausting to be masking as a neurodivergent person, and ideally it wouldn't be necessary. So I think if we continue to create awareness and understanding, and if you're interviewing people, that's a really great point. Don't expect that eye contact, don't expect that tone, and kind of work from there. And maybe one day, yeah, if we continue to kind of share these resources and have these conversations, we'll be able to have that society where, yeah, we don't even really need to ask these questions, and you can just go into a job interview and be your authentic self. But yeah, I think on that note, I might leave the rest of the questions. There are still a couple, but I'll go through those ones, yeah, after the webinar. So I'm going to hand back to Rebecca. Thank you so much for coming along today, everyone. And yeah, I look forward to, I don't know, hearing any feedback or yeah, seeing you all if I see you. Thank you.
Teagan, thank you for a wonderful presentation and for a very generous and thorough resource that you've shared with us. And I say generous in the sense of I know how much time and effort can go into creating a resource like that, and you've very systematically broken it down. You've obviously done a lot of research and worked across a lot of teams and consulted with a lot of people to put that together, but also how you've entwined personal lived experience in that. And for you to share with us today is really wonderful. And so from everyone who is here today, I thank you. There are a lot of comments, and there's a lot of people, while you were processing the questions, I asked people to put in strategies that they've used or that they've implemented or seen being implemented at their institutions. And there's some incredible things happening around the sector. So hopefully I'm looking at Kylie's little box up on my screen. I'm hoping we can share that chat. We can save the chat in the first instant and then share it with participants and with yourself. And thank you again for answering the questions that you've answered, and offering to answer the ones that are still there or that are still coming through actually. So again, thank you for your time. And thank you also to our captioner, Helen. An email will be sent out to all people who registered for this webinar when the recording is available on the ADCET website. So please feel free to share it with your colleagues. Let's spread the word. We ask for everyone here, we ask you complete our short survey on this webinar and sign up to our newsletter. These links will now be added to the chat box. And please save the date for our upcoming webinars. We have Exploring Inclusive Assessment Strategies at RMIT University, a panel discussion which will be held on Thursday, the 30th of October. And as Teagan mentioned previously, we have the Neurodiversity Paradigm 101, Lessons from the Movement for Higher Education on Wednesday, 19 November with E.B. Gannon, which we're all very much looking forward to continuing this conversation. And further details are available in the chat box for these upcoming webinars. Thanks, everyone. That's all for today. Have a wonderful afternoon.